right, here's my clicker. Wow, I'm super humbled by the intelligence in this room. It's an honor to be able to share with you the work that I've been doing. I am a townie. I grew up in Berkeley. I went to Berkeley High School. I then went to the East Coast because after sneaking around into frat parties, you want to get out of town and get away for a little while. I went to Vassar College, and our mascot was is the Brewers. So I am the science director at the Greater Good Science Center. We are an organization within the Department of Psychology at Berkeley, and what we do is track the cutting-edge research about social connection, about kindness, and about community or cooperation. And we write about it really quickly in ways that are accessible to a popular audience. What you do find sometimes with psychology research or neuroscience research or public health is that it stays inside of a small group of experts for a while before it becomes something that people can apply. We're trying to short circuit that or disrupt it, using my newfound technology Silicon Valley talk. Again, provide these insights faster. We also host educational events. One of them you heard about, our MOOC, and I'll tell you a lot more about that in the next 20 minutes. And we also support researchers both on campus at UC Berkeley and nationwide through various fellowship mechanisms. So before I launch into the idea that it's even useful to talk about happiness or to pursue happiness or to advocate happiness, it's a good idea to sort of share with you the sort of most common definition that researchers use when they talk about what happiness means. So this is a definition from Sonia Lubomirsky, who is UC Riverside, written several books about happiness, as one of the pioneers in research on happiness. And the way she defines it, the experience of joy, contentment, or positive well-being combined with a sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. There are different ways that people from different cultures tend to think about happiness. And one of the first things we do in our course is explore that terrain. People in our kind of modern, Western, contemporary, individualistic culture tend to think about happiness in terms of immediate gratification, pleasure, accumulation of resources, and individual success, being sort of one who stands out amongst the crowd. More Eastern collectivist cultures tend to think of happiness in a more collectivist way. Happiness is more intrinsically tied to one's connections within a broader community. Recently, one of our fellows, Brett Ford at UC Berkeley, published a paper showing that when people pursue happiness, this only is helpful if they think of happiness really in the similar way that it's defined here, which is that it's about the greater good, not about accumulating things for the self. When people pursue happiness in the interest of maximizing pleasure or accumulating resources, actually it can be deleterious. And this research has also been done at UC Berkeley by Iris Moss. So there's this whole controversy about pursuing happiness. We were grateful that Brett published her findings showing that when you think about happiness in an accurate way, pursuing it is actually a service to your well-being. So why is happiness interesting? When we do think of it in a more sort of wholesome and collectivistic way, because it makes a difference in people's lives, both individually and at national levels. And the 2015 World Happiness Report sort of highlights how valuable it has been to measure happiness amongst citizens of different nations and understand why policy should be interested in happiness levels amongst nations and understanding what can be done to try to boost or increase or strengthen happiness amongst a given nation. When you look at who scores at the top, it tends to be the case that Scandinavian countries score high on happiness. We come in around 15. Which maybe is not consistent with what you might assume given the sort of relative dominance of the United States as an international force in the world. But in terms of happiness, we fall fairly low, below places like Israel, Sweden, The reason I really share this slide is not to make you feel bad about your potential, but really to direct you to the bottom part of it. And the reason is because it, again, highlights this idea that happiness is not about pleasure, immediately gratifying your desires or accumulating resources. Even those who put together the World Happiness Report, which is a team of scientists and policymakers, they account for it by looking at per capita income, by looking at social support, life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, generosity, right? And then there's two negatively coded constructs, the perception of corruption and dystopia. So really happiness, you can't just think of it in that like sort of unidimensional way of happiness is about giving your employees food every day. Right, people who do work in places that have that privilege, Facebook. I think that it's really wonderful when it first starts, and then at the 4th or 5th month of working there, you're like, I don't want the one that's half empty. I want that pan back there that's new and has more sauce on top, or whatever it is. These sorts of normal pleasures, sort of, we habituate to them. We get used to them. They're not the secret to sustained happiness. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we think are more promising ways to infuse people and communities with this, what I would call sustained happiness. So Science of Happiness, as you heard, we've had more than 200,000 people register for this massive open online course. It's on the edX platform. We've gotten tons of wonderful support from Berkeley and Extension, both in terms of thinking how to do it and just enthusiasm. The first to teach this material online. Now there is another course that's offered by another expert, Barbara Fredrickson, on the Coursera platform, but it's a little bit different. What do we do in the Science of Happiness? After we sort of share our revised definition of happiness, that it's complex, that it has multiple facets to it, and that it isn't discovered through pursuing, again, personal pleasure or immediate gratification, we then go through systems in the body that are instrumental to supporting experiences and behaviors that help us connect with other people. That the ways that our biology is, in a sense, sort of built for functioning in community and in cooperative relationships. So we talk about the vagus nerve, which comes out of the brainstem and goes all over the body, and researchers look at its impact on the heart, and by looking at how strongly it impacts the heart, we understand something about people's degrees of contentment, their capacity to recover from stress, their ability to cope, their social attunement. So there's this kind of like flip side thing. If you're less stressed, if you're less inclined towards a kind of self-referential vigilance type thinking, you are intrinsically more available to make eye contact, to attune, to understand and empathize with those who are around you, working with you. So the vagus nerve is this very basic system that functions early in life to motivate affiliation, to motivate connections between parents and children, but also sort of the nervous system is very, it uses the same systems throughout life. Even if it's important for early childhood connections with parents, it's the same system that gets used or that comes into play when we form our long-term adult friendships and relationships. We talk about the brain, low in the brain, our hypothalamic midbrain circuits. Again, if these are working, then mothers and fathers behave the way that you might expect them to as parents. They approach, they protect, they nurture. If they're not working, they don't. If they work well between a dyad of parent and infant, the infant grows up into an adult who has satisfying and long-lasting productive relationships with other adults, be they friendships or romantic partnerships. So again, these basic systems, very low in the nervous system, which means that we've been involved with them for many, many, many years. They're not sort of the newer, higher intelligent part of who we think we are. They're very core and basic to our humanity. We talk about oxytocin, not to be confused with OxyContin. So we know from researchers in Europe and sometimes in the US, but they've been more progressive than us, if you squirt oxytocin into the nose and then you have people interact with one another, they interact in a more generous, trusting, safe, and kind manner. So oxytocin is a neuropeptide that we endogenously manufacture in the service of being kind to others, in the service of establishing these trusting, safe relationships. Oh, I didn't tell you why the little rodents. The history of the science comes from studying two strains of what's called a vole. There's a mountain vole and a prairie vole, and one of them was very polygamous and philandering, and the other one was very monogamous and formed these lifelong bonds. They didn't look different on the outside, but when they looked inside, the difference was oxytocin. So it was better, more enhanced manufacturing and receptivity to oxytocin in the long-term bonding strain. Looking at the brain, we go through multiple sections in the course discussing how systems are sort of set us up such that when we're in the presence of others, we, without involuntarily, mimic and represent in our own brains the feelings that we're seeing in other people. We have mirror neurons in certain areas that help us mimic the actions of others, which help us understand what those actions mean, because sometimes we exhibit those actions ourselves. We have other areas of our cortex that are dedicated to taking other people's perspectives, to becoming experts in what very nuanced and subtle facial configurations mean and why they should guide our particular behavior should we be in the presence of another person. We have reward circuitry, which is often sort of thought of in the domains of addiction and pleasure, but really this system works in a lot of different contexts, and the one that's most interesting here is that it fires when we're kind to others. So there's a wonderful study from UCLA where the team brought couples into the lab, and they put one person into an fMRI scanner, which measures brain activation, and they had the other person standing outside. And the task was, this person standing outside is going to get shocked, right? They have little electrodes, they're going to get a zzz thing, and it's not comfortable. Person inside is given the option to hold on to that person outside somewhere and sort of just be present in a supportive way. I'm here for you. I know you're going to have this painful thing happen, but I'm supporting you. And when they look at the brain and what happens in the brain during that support compared to a control condition of like holding on to a ball, right, the same sort of tactile sensation, those who are lending support more robustly engage this reward circuitry in the brain. If you're poised to collaborate with somebody, if you do it by yourself and you win $20, you get a certain activation in this reward circuitry. Now, do something a little bit different, but earn the very same amount through a cooperative enterprise, right? You do it together, $20. That cooperative $20 more robustly engages reward circuitry in your brain than the $20 that you won by yourself. So there's all this evidence biologically that points to this intrinsic sort of drive and quality of humanity, which is to be social. There's a team that recently published a theory which they're calling the social baseline theory, which basically assumes that it's not the ideal to think of humans alone as the baseline, right? It used to be like, oh, let's design a study, and the baseline is you're by yourself. And let's look at what happens when we bring someone else in the room and see sort of additively what else activates. How does the brain do something different when you're with somebody else? Well, these guys looked at many, many studies and were like, it's so bizarre. It seems like there is more going on when people are alone. And specifically in areas that are involved in sort of threat detection or salience or vigilance. And so their whole theory is, wait, we've got this backwards. By baseline, our bodies expect to be in the presence of others and expect that others are trusted, safe allies that are opportunities for collaboration or formation of relationships. Like that's our essential baseline normative state, and that being alone, being isolated, being by ourselves is actually something that is intrinsically inherently stressful. There's a good amount of data on loneliness these days showing that people who are lonely, who feel lonely, have compromised immune systems. They are at much higher cardiovascular risk. So there are all these like converging pieces of data showing that being connected, being kind, being good at connecting in collaborative ways and contributing to your community are essential and instrumental to what we're calling happiness, which some people might call it subjective well-being, but that's just fancy talk. This last map I'm showing you is is a lineage of studies looking at how kindness compares to self-interest in little laboratory studies. So half the room, you get $20. In the morning, I measure how happy you are. This room, same thing. And then I say, you go out and spend $20 on yourself. You go out and spend $20 on someone else. Come back 3 hours later, I measure happiness again. You guys show a much bigger increase in your happiness than you guys. We really like giving things to other people. Looking at that in the lab works, looking at that across labs work. And now here, there's this correlation, which goes from green to red, green being a higher value. Everywhere this team looked, the correlation tended to be positive for the relationship between how much pro-social spending was going on, that is giving of your own personal resources to others, and well-being at national levels. The only places you can see pink and red tend to be places where there are some serious threats going on in people's lives. And it may not be, I don't really have to explain that. If you can't really trust that you're going to survive the next day, it's hard to live in this space of kindness. So key take-home number 1, sympathy. We sort of redefine Darwin for people, because I think all of us walk around with this survival of the fittest mentality, and fittest being about big teeth and hair and muscles and, you know, Magic Mike XXL, right? Right, just hugeness and strength and brawn, when in fact, if you really look closely at what Darwin wrote, that's not at all what he wrote, right? So fitness doesn't mean being strong and being able to beat everyone else. Fitness means being able to work in a collective group and being good at nurturing other people around you, being sympathetic. This quote that I'm showing on the bottom comes from Ed Diener and Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who also are kind of pioneers in happiness science, and what they found by looking at all the kind of correlation studies. Let's measure everyone's happiness and see what's going on in their life. Are they rich? Are they poor? Are they the second sibling? Are they successful? Are they respected in their communities? The thing that pops out, no matter where you look, is social relationships. Feeling like you're enmeshed in a community of supportive others. When that happens, you're eligible for happiness. When that doesn't happen, you're not, no matter what else you've got. So social relationships, this connection, is what's essential. Key take-home number 2, a lot of people walk around thinking, I am who I am. This is who I am. I was born this way. I've got my life. Take me like I am, or you know, do something else or go somewhere else. We know now from 15 years of neuroscience, and you know, probably more before that, that the brain is really malleable, and that it changes as we change. And if we decide, I'm going to begin to sort of shift my perspective, which originally thought that I'm only capable of one thing, and now I'm doing something that I felt like I was no longer capable of, but I'm just doing it repeatedly, my brain is going to adapt to that, and that second thing that I want is going to become more easy. So we have the capacity, our brains are flexible, adaptive. It's not hard to get people to become happier if they sign on for whatever program they sort of ultimately land on as what is sort of most fitting for them. And that's another piece of the class that we talk about, that there are lots of ways that scientists have come up with and measured that can lead to increased happiness, but they don't all fit everyone, and we don't expect everyone to do all of them. But there's a way to sort of look at yourself and look at the menu of options and come up with a plan, much like you might at the gym. Myths we work on dispelling, and I already kind of did this. The cartoon says I wrote another 500 words, can I have another cookie, right? And the myth is that it's all about pleasure, that if I can just feel pleasure all the time, I'll be happy, right? We know that people who experience sadness and anger in a sort of more mosaic-like palette, along with joy and exuberance and pride, do better in the long run. It's not ideal. We would never suggest, and the science doesn't suggest, that you should try to suppress or sort of do away with experiences in life that are associated with negative emotions. Anger is about addressing injustice. It's very important. Sadness is about soliciting support. It's very important. We need to have those experiences, and they're part of the overall plan. And again, if you keep pursuing pleasure, you end up on what's called the hedonic treadmill. Like, this isn't good. I've got this now. Now I need that. Now I need that. Now I need that. And ultimately, there's nothing that's satisfying. The other myth we dispel, which is very related, and this says I should have bought more crap, is that it's about accumulating stuff. If we just have a lot of things, if I have more things, I'm going to be happier. Things that I think make me happy, right? Again, it's not about accumulation of things. It's not about trying to feel pleasure all the time, right? Those don't work. They're not the ways that people get happier. And then the third one is kind of a resistance to change. This idea that, well, yeah, this all sounds great, but I'm not going to do it. You know, okay, maybe mindfulness is something that is really great, and we hear in many different, ways. I know that there was a big event at Salesforce recently where they talked about mindfulness, and there's the Wisdom 2.0 sort of phenomenon, and it's a big movement, but it's based on some pretty good data that people who become more self-aware and become better able to relate to their own emotions and their own bodies tend to do better in the world. And so, again, this idea that you just kind of sometimes have to fake it till you make it is one that we stand behind. Even if it feels hard, even if it's something that just doesn't make sense, sometimes just trying it, like, for instance, random acts of kindness. It doesn't feel natural, doesn't feel authentic, but if you just do it, sometimes you can really feel from experience how it helps. A last set of challenges I'm going to share with you is sort of the fear of missing out, FOMO, or social comparison. These are things that are really hard for us. We look at everybody else on Facebook who is only posting their vacations and their successes, and we think, here I am at work, and I'm feeling guilty that I'm looking at Facebook, and I'm also feeling badly because I'm not going on these wonderful vacations and feeling comfortable. I'm not blaming Facebook for that. That's our own kind of habit of looking at others, and instead of having an experience of what you might call sympathetic joy or vicarious pleasure in what they're experiencing, we tend to do this social comparison thing, which is really harmful to our own well-being and our happiness. So we talk about those challenges. In the course, not only do we do the science and talk about some of the challenges, we also every week give people specific practices to try. And here are 5 of them: 3 good things, mindful breathing, gratitude letter, active listening, random acts of kindness. We also have a week about conflict resolution and forgiveness and apology, which I wish was on here because in terms of our testimonials, we get so many really deep and heartfelt, utterances about it. People just from a deep place saying, this was the part of the course that moved me, that really changed my life. I can share that graphic if anybody wants to see it. We have piles of them. How do we know anything worked? I love teaching, but I also love numbers. Every week we ask people to look at these 6 little things and tell us how much they described how they've been doing lately, past 3, 4, or 5 days. We took all that data and we plotted it over the 10 weeks of the course. What you're looking at is basically the 3 sort of more positive emotions minus the 3 more negative emotions. And even though I said that it's important to have negative emotions, it's not valuable to stew in them and think every minute that you're feeling is them, right? To have them and recover from them is an essential skill in happiness. And to retrospect in a more rosy way, like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Things have been good. I had that hard moment, but things have been good, right? To move on is what's valuable. And as you can see, over the 10 weeks, we see this slow but steady incline in people's what we're calling happiness score. We also administered standard psychology survey questionnaires, subjective happiness. What you're looking at on the left is before the course, in the middle is immediately after the course, and on the right is 3 months later, when we haven't talked to these people for a long time, okay? Psychological well-being flourishing scale. So this is kind of my life matters. Things are meaningful for me. Stress goes down. Loneliness goes down. 2 other scales, satisfaction with life going up. All of these results are highly statistically significant because the numbers are really big. And when we look at this measure, which I love, which you look at these little bubbles and you say, how much am I kind of like other people? Humanity. We call it a common humanity measure. And over time, engaging with this content, trying out the practices, results in people rating themselves as more overlapping, as having a more sort of pronounced common humanity with other people in the world. The last thing I want to do is just share with you a couple of testimonials. Again, these are sort of spontaneously come to us through email. They come to us because at the end of the course we ask for them. They come to us through a Facebook page, which students automatically created, a Facebook group. And oftentimes we'll get people, and this isn't the greatest for the course, but people who say, I haven't done anything in the course yet, but I can't tell you how meaningful it is for me to look at this group's posts every day. This in and of itself is something that really makes my day. So there's these sort of ancillary things that are happening that we feel grateful to be a part of. So this person kind of felt like they had figured out how to just change their mindset, their general way of being. This is a powerful one when we talk about that myth of I'm inflexible. Second one, personal relationships. I put more emphasis on constructive and respectful open communication. So I take responsibility for when these problems might have something to do with me, where I might have otherwise previously tried to blame other people. I've known people who are not good at forgiving, who would never do it, who would hold a grudge, and now I feel like things are different for me, and that can be really powerful. And then finally, happiness is a skill. And that's really kind of what we want to, I guess it should be sort of key take-home 3, right? That you can work on aspects of your life, your behavior, your day in and day out experiences in a way that will lead to you feeling overall like a happier person in the world. And that's it. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
We have time for a question or two, and then we'll get the next presenter. Any questions for? Are you going to hang out to?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
yeah.
so
yeah. Happy to.
Questions,
yeah.
and then
I'm a huge supporter of Lumosity. I'm a lifetime member.
Great.
There is another site called Happify.
Yep.
I'm interested in your take on Happify versus this kind of stuff you're doing, because they seem like they overlap a lot.
They overlap a lot, and I have great respect for Happify. There's probably about 4 others that are kind of trying to do the same thing, and they're all, one of the slides, the last one listed a link called GGIA, which is Greater Good in Action, which is kind of our version of a static website of Happify. Instead of it being an app that you sort of sign on for and get pinged by, it's a site where it's kind of like the library. You go and you go, oh, I want to work on compassion. Here are the 10 research-tested practices that are beneficial for sort of fostering greater compassion in yourself. So it's really, I think it's great. I think the more the merrier. I don't think that there's anything that I can point to that's super harmful. The ones that I'm suspect about are when they are very passive. And some people call me up and they're like, what do you think of this thing where you put an electrode on and it stimulates your facial nerve and then you can concentrate and be more emotionally stable? And I'm like, okay, why not a double latte? Honestly, I mean, it's something passive that you introduce and it's not you doing it. And there's a real difference between things that sort of just you sort of put on you versus things that you sort of sign on for and put some of your own heart into. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, you guys. Took too much time.